My daughter-in-law said I wouldn't get a dime from my ex-husband's $53 million inheritance. You're too old to enjoy it. When they sat down for the will reading, my lawyer read a single sentence that made them faint. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The funeral flowers were still fresh when my daughter-in-law Victoria cornered me in Robert's study. The smell of lilies clung to my black dress as I stood there, surrounded by 43 years of my husband's life, while she delivered the blow that would change everything. Let's be honest here, Helen, Victoria said, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against Robert's mahogany desk. You're 64 years old. What exactly are you going to do with $53 million? My son Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. The same boy I'd rocked to sleep, nursed through fevers, cheered at Little League games. Now he looked at me like I was an obstacle to overcome. I clutched the arm of Robert's leather chair, the one where he'd spent countless evenings reading while I worked on my crossword puzzles nearby. This is my home, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Robert and I built this life together. Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the silence of the house. Built what? You've been playing house while Robert built an empire. Do you even know how to manage that kind of money? You still balance your checkbook by hand. The words stung because they held a grain of truth. I'd always left the finances to Robert. He'd insisted on it, actually, wanting me to focus on our home, our family. Now that felt like a lifetime ago. The lawyers are expecting us Thursday morning. Marcus finally spoke, his voice flat and businesslike. We've already drafted the papers. You sign over your inheritance rights, and we'll make sure you're comfortable in a nice senior community. A senior community? My legs felt weak. I sank into Robert's chair, and Victoria's expression immediately hardened. Don't get dramatic, Helen. Sunny Hills is lovely. They have bingo on Wednesdays. Her tone was condescending, the way you'd talk to a confused child. You'll have everything you need. Medical care, activities, people your own age. Robert left me this house in his will, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Had he? In the chaos of his final days, the hospital visits, the medications, I hadn't thought about legal documents. Victoria exchanged a look with Marcus, and I caught something in that glance, something that made my stomach turn cold. Mother, Marcus said, using the formal tone he'd adopted years ago when he married Victoria. Dad wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The medication, the stress of being sick. He made some questionable decisions. Questionable decisions? I stood up so quickly the chair spun. Your father's mind was sharp until the day he died. Was it, though? Victoria pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Because I have recordings of him calling me Margaret last month. That was his first wife's name, wasn't it? The one who died 20 years before he met you? The room tilted. Robert had been confused that day, yes, but the doctors said that was normal with the pain medication, hadn't they? He also asked me to remind him how old his grandson was, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a mock sympathetic tone. We don't have children, Helen. Marcus and I have been married 8 years, and we don't have children. I felt like I was drowning. Robert had bad days, but... Bad days? Marcus interrupted. Mom, he forgot your anniversary last year. He kept asking why there were flowers in the house. That wasn't true. Robert had been tired, yes, but he'd remembered our anniversary. He'd given me the pearl earrings I was wearing right now. My hand automatically went to my ear, touching the smooth surface of the pearl. We're not trying to hurt you, Victoria said, stepping closer. We're trying to protect you, and honestly, we're trying to protect Robert's legacy. Do you want people to remember him as the man whose elderly widow lost everything to scam artists? I'm not elderly, I said weakly, hating how pathetic I sounded. You're not young either, Victoria replied. Helen, be practical. What would you do with this house? It's 6,000 square feet. You'd rattle around in here like a ghost. And the money? Investment bankers would line up to take advantage of you the moment they heard you were a rich widow. She painted a picture that terrified me. Me, alone in this massive house, making financial decisions I didn't understand, slowly being drained of everything Robert had worked for. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too old, too naive, too trusting. "The papers are simple," Marcus said, pulling a folder from Robert's desk drawer. "Had they prepared this beforehand? You transfer your inheritance rights to us, and we'll ensure you're taken care of for life. You'll have a monthly allowance, full medical coverage, and we'll visit regularly." Visit? I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had his eyes become so cold? "Marcus, this is my home. This is where your father and I—" "Where you what?" Victoria's voice turned sharp again. "Had a marriage? Helen, let's not pretend this was some great love story. You were Robert's second wife, his consolation prize after Margaret died. The cruelty of it took my breath away." "That's not true, isn't it? You were 21 when you married him. He was 45, a widower with a baby. You were his nanny who happened to be convenient." Each word was a carefully aimed arrow, because there was truth in them, twisted though they were. I had been young when I married Robert. I had been Marcus's nanny first. But Robert had loved me. He'd chosen me. He'd built a life with me. "Sign the papers, Helen," Victoria said, her voice returning to that false sweetness. "Stop making this harder than it needs to be. We're family. We're trying to help you." I stared at the documents Marcus held out to me. Legal language I didn't understand, but the intent was clear. They wanted me to disappear quietly, to fade away so they could inherit everything without the inconvenience of caring for Robert's widow. "I need time to think," I managed to say. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Of course you do. But Helen? Don't take too long. These arrangements at Sunny Hills don't stay available forever." The threat was barely veiled. Sign over the inheritance, or they'd find another way to get rid of me. As they left the study, I remained frozen in Robert's chair, surrounded by his books, his awards, his photographs. In every picture where we appeared together, I looked happy. We looked happy. Had I been fooling myself for 43 years? My hands shook as I reached for the phone to call our family lawyer, but then I stopped. Did I even know his number? Robert had always handled these things. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe I was just a naive old woman who'd been protected from the real world for too long. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something nagged at me. Something about the way Victoria had been so prepared, so ready with her cruel words and legal documents. Something about how quickly Marcus had produced those papers from Robert's own desk. How long had they been planning this? The house felt different now, like it was already slipping away from me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Robert would never have left me defenseless. There had to be something I was missing, something Victoria and Marcus didn't know about. 3 days after Victoria's ultimatum, I found myself standing in Robert's bedroom at 3 a.m., unable to sleep. The bed felt enormous without him, cold despite the electric blanket I'd turned up to the highest setting. Everything in this room held memories, but tonight they felt tainted by Victoria's words. I'd been going through Robert's things slowly, trying to decide what to keep, what to donate. It was easier to focus on the practical tasks than to think about the papers Marcus wanted me to sign. But as I opened his nightstand drawer, looking for the reading glasses he'd always misplaced, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A small digital recorder, the kind Robert used to use for dictating business letters years ago. I'd thought he'd stopped using it when he got his smartphone. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Robert's voice filled the room, weak but unmistakably lucid. "Helen, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone and they've started their games." I nearly dropped the device. This recording was recent. I could hear the slight rasp in his voice that had developed during his illness. "I've been watching them, sweetheart, Marcus and Victoria. I know what they're planning, and I've taken steps to protect you. Don't sign anything. Whatever they tell you about me being confused or incompetent, don't believe them." My heart pounded so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Robert had known. He'd known what they were planning. "Check behind my books on the third shelf, the Hemingway collection. There's something you need to see." With shaking hands, I went to his study and pulled out the Hemingway books. Behind them was a manila folder, thick with documents, bank statements, emails, photographs. As I spread them across his desk, a picture emerged that made me sick to my stomach. Bank transfers from Robert's personal account to Marcus's business. But not the legitimate ones Robert had told me about. These were smaller amounts. 50,000 here, 30,000 there, all marked as personal loans that had never been repaid. Over 2 years, Marcus had taken nearly $500,000. But that wasn't the worst part. The emails made my blood run cold. Marcus to Victoria, dated 6 months ago. The old man's getting suspicious. We need to speed up the timeline. Victoria's response: I'm working on isolating him from Helen. Already convinced him she's been spending too much money. He's starting to question her purchases. I remembered that argument. Robert had confronted me about a charge for $800 at Nordstrom. I'd been confused because I hadn't been to Nordstrom in months, but when I checked my credit card statement, there it was. I'd assumed it was a mistake and meant to call the bank, but then Robert got sicker and I forgot about it. Now I saw it clearly in Victoria's emails. Used Helen's card number for my shopping trip. Robert's already suspicious. Perfect timing. The methodical cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd been setting me up, making me look irresponsible with money while they drained Robert's accounts. I found photographs next. Pictures taken with a telephoto lens of me having lunch with my friend Dorothy at the country club. Innocent pictures, but attached notes written in Victoria's handwriting. Helen with male friend, 2:30 p.m. Tuesday. Seemed very intimate. The male friend was Dorothy's 70-year-old brother visiting from Phoenix. We'd had lunch and talked about his grandchildren, but Victoria had made it look like I was having an affair. More emails revealed their plan in horrifying detail. They'd been working to convince Robert that I was unfaithful, irresponsible with money, and possibly showing signs of dementia myself. Victoria had even researched symptoms of early-onset Alzheimer's to plant seeds of doubt in Robert's mind. Marcus to Victoria: keep pushing the angle about her memory. Ask her about conversations that never happened. When she seems confused, point it out to Dad. I remembered now. All those times Victoria had asked me about plans we'd supposedly made, conversations we'd supposedly had. When I couldn't remember them, she'd get that concerned look and suggest maybe I should see a doctor. But the most devastating discovery was an email thread about their plans for after Robert's death. Victoria to Marcus: Sunny Hills costs $3,200 a month. If we can get Helen declared incompetent, we can be her financial guardians. She'll never see a penny of the inheritance money, and we can sell the house immediately. Marcus's response: perfect. She's already isolated from her few friends. No one will question our decisions about her care. I had to run to the bathroom. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that my body couldn't process it. They hadn't just planned to steal my inheritance. They'd planned to have me declared mentally incompetent and locked away in a nursing home while they spent Robert's money. When I returned to the study, I found more evidence. Printed emails between Victoria and someone named Dr. Reginald Hartwell, a psychiatrist who specialized in elderly mental health evaluations. Victoria: we'll need a professional evaluation stating that Mrs. Thornton is no longer capable of managing her affairs. She's shown signs of confusion and memory loss. Can you accommodate us next week? Dr. Hartwell: I'll need to see documented evidence of cognitive decline. Can the family provide specific instances? Victoria: of course. We've been keeping detailed records. The detailed records were a file of lies. Victoria had documented every moment when I seemed confused, but she'd created most of those moments herself. Times when she'd given me wrong information about appointments, then acted concerned when I showed up on the wrong day. Times when she'd asked me about events that had never happened, then noted my memory lapses when I couldn't recall them. The picture that emerged was of a woman slowly losing her mind. If I hadn't found these documents, if I'd walked into that psychiatric evaluation unprepared, Dr. Hartwell would have declared me incompetent based on Victoria's manufactured evidence. I sat in Robert's chair, surrounded by proof of my son and daughter-in-law's betrayal, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just hurt or anger, but a cold, clear rage. They'd been systematically destroying my reputation, my relationship with my husband, and my future. But Robert had known. The recorder proved he'd figured out their game. And if he'd hidden these documents for me to find, what else had he prepared? I searched through more of his belongings, my movements guided by a growing determination. In his closet, behind winter coats that smelled like his cologne, I found a safe I'd never known existed. The combination was our wedding date. Inside was a letter addressed to me in Robert's handwriting, along with business cards for 3 different lawyers. Not the family attorney Marcus had mentioned, but private practices that specialized in elder law and inheritance protection. "My dearest Helen," the letter began, "if you're reading this, you found the evidence of their betrayal. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from learning this truth, but I couldn't act without proof. I've been gathering evidence for months, and I've taken steps to ensure they cannot hurt you." The letter went on to explain that Robert had been aware of their manipulation for nearly a year. He'd hired a private investigator, changed his will without telling anyone, and set up protections that Marcus and Victoria knew nothing about. "They think I was a confused old man in my final months," he wrote. "I let them think that. It was easier to catch them in their lies when they thought I wasn't paying attention." As I held Robert's letter, I realized that Victoria and Marcus weren't the only ones who had been playing a game. Robert had been playing too, and he'd been several moves ahead of them the entire time. But the most important line in his letter was at the end. "Don't sign anything until you meet with my attorney. James Morrison knows everything. Trust him, and trust the plan we made together." I looked at the business card for James Morrison, attorney at law. His office address was across town, far from the family lawyer Marcus had mentioned. This was Robert's secret lawyer, the one who knew the truth about everything. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt hope. My husband hadn't left me defenseless after all. He'd seen what was coming and prepared for it. Victoria and Marcus thought they were dealing with a naive, grieving widow. They had no idea that Robert had been planning his own strategy all along. I clutched Robert's letter to my chest and smiled for the first time in weeks. My son and daughter-in-law had underestimated both of us. Now it was time to find out exactly what Robert had planned for their betrayal. James Morrison's law office was nothing like the polished marble and mahogany I'd expected. Located in a modest building downtown, it felt more like a family doctor's office than a place where $53 million estates were handled. But when the receptionist led me to his private office, I understood why Robert had chosen him. The walls were lined with photographs of elderly clients, thank you letters, and certificates from organizations that protected seniors from financial abuse. This wasn't just a lawyer's office. It was a sanctuary for people like me. "Mrs. Thornton," James Morrison stood as I entered. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been waiting for your call. Robert said you'd find your way here when you were ready." "He told you I would come?" "He told me many things." James gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Your husband was a very thorough man, Mrs. Thornton, very protective of the people he loved." I settled into the chair, clutching my purse with Robert's letter inside. "How long did you know about Marcus and Victoria?" "Robert first contacted me 8 months ago. He suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Over the next several months, we built a case together." James pulled out a thick file labeled Thornton Estate, Confidential. "Your husband was smarter than his son gave him credit for." The word son came out with a slight edge, and I realized James had seen the evidence of Marcus's betrayal too. "Robert hired a private investigator," James continued, opening the file. "A former FBI agent named Sarah Chen. She documented everything. The financial theft, the manipulation, the plans to have you declared incompetent." He handed me a photograph, and my breath caught. It showed Victoria and Marcus at an expensive restaurant, toasting with champagne. The timestamp showed it was taken the day after Robert's diagnosis, when they'd supposedly been devastated by the news. "Sarah recorded their conversations," James said. "Would you like to hear what they really thought about your husband's illness?" I nodded, though part of me dreaded what I might hear. James pressed play on a small device. Victoria's voice filled the room, clear and cold. "Finally, I was wondering how long we'd have to wait for the old man to keel over." Marcus's response made my stomach turn. "The timing is perfect. Helen's already emotionally fragile. We can use that. And if she gets suspicious, she won't. She's been dependent on Dad for everything her whole life. She has no idea how to handle real-world situations. I closed my eyes, but James's gentle voice brought me back. There's more, Mrs. Thornton. They discussed their plans in detail. The recording continued. Victoria describing how they would isolate me from friends, make me question my own memory, and eventually have me committed to a facility where I'd have no control over my finances. The beautiful part, Victoria's voice continued, is that Helen will actually thank us for taking care of everything. She's so used to being taken care of that she'll see it as kindness. What about Dad's will? Marcus asked on the recording. He's already showing signs of confusion. If we need to, we can contest it. Claim he wasn't mentally competent when he wrote it. With Helen declared incompetent too, we'll be the only ones left to inherit. But then Marcus said something that made my blood freeze. What if he changes the will? He's been asking a lot of questions about our business lately. Victoria's laugh was sharp and cruel. Let him change it. A confused old man's last-minute changes to his will? Any judge would see that as evidence of mental incompetence. We're covered either way. James stopped the recording. They underestimated your husband, Mrs. Thornton. Robert was never confused. He was investigating. But he seemed so. I struggled for the words. There were times when he did seem lost. He was acting, James said gently. It was the only way to gather evidence without making them suspicious. Robert let them think they were manipulating him, while he was actually documenting everything they did. James opened another section of the file, revealing photographs, bank records, and transcripts of recorded conversations. Your husband spent months building this case. He knew that when the time came, he'd need irrefutable proof of their intentions. What kind of proof? Video recordings of them discussing their plans to steal from the estate, bank records showing Marcus's unauthorized withdrawals, evidence of Victoria's credit card fraud, and most importantly, documentation of their plan to have you declared mentally incompetent. I stared at the evidence spread across James's desk. How did he gather all this without them knowing? James smiled. Your husband was more tech-savvy than he let on. He installed cameras in his study, recorded phone conversations, and even wore a wire during some of their visits. Sarah Chen helped him set everything up. The picture became clearer. All those times Robert had seemed to nap during Marcus and Victoria's visits, he'd been recording their conversations. When he'd asked them to repeat things because he couldn't hear well, he'd been making sure the recording device caught every word. The medication confusion was an act too, James continued. Robert was sharp until the very end. But he let them think the drugs were affecting his mind because they revealed more of their plans when they thought he wasn't really listening. I remembered those final weeks, how Robert would sometimes stare off into space during Victoria's visits, how he'd ask the same questions repeatedly. I'd worried about his mental state, but he'd been performing for an audience of 2. He protected you the only way he could, James said, by letting them think they'd already won. What about the will? James's expression grew serious. That's where your husband's plan gets truly brilliant. He created multiple versions of his will over the past year. The one Marcus and Victoria know about, the one they're expecting, does leave most of the estate to them, with provisions for your care at Sunny Hills. My heart sank. So they were right about... No, James's voice was firm. That will was a decoy. Robert made sure Marcus and Victoria saw drafts of it, left copies where they could find them. He wanted them to feel confident about their inheritance. A decoy? The real will, the one that's legally binding, was executed just 6 weeks before Robert's death. It includes specific clauses about inheritance forfeiture for family members who engage in elder abuse, financial exploitation, or attempts to manipulate the testator's mental capacity. James pulled out a legal document with Robert's signature, witnessed and notarized. This is the real will, Mrs. Thornton, and according to its terms, Marcus and Victoria have disqualified themselves from any inheritance through their own actions. What does that mean? It means you inherit everything. The house, the investments, the business interests, all $53 million. Marcus and Victoria get nothing. The room seemed to spin. Nothing? Well, not quite nothing. Robert left them each exactly $1, along with a detailed explanation of why they're being disinherited. He wanted to make sure there was no legal ambiguity about his intentions. James handed me another document, a letter Robert had written to be read with the will. Even through my tears, I could see his careful handwriting. To my son, Marcus, and his wife, Victoria, you have shown me that blood relations mean nothing without love and respect. Your greed and cruelty toward my beloved wife, Helen, have earned you this inheritance, the knowledge that your own actions have cost you everything. When will they find out? I asked. At the official reading tomorrow. They'll be expecting to hear their names as primary beneficiaries. Instead, they'll learn that they've been completely cut out. I thought about Victoria's smug confidence, Marcus's casual cruelty. They had no idea what was coming. There's one more thing, James said. Robert included a provision that if Marcus and Victoria attempt to contest the will or harass you in any way, evidence of their financial crimes will be turned over to the district attorney. Sarah Chen has already prepared the criminal complaint. Criminal complaint? Marcus embezzled nearly $500,000 from your husband's accounts. Victoria committed credit card fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Robert documented everything, but he gave them a choice: accept their disinheritance quietly or face prosecution. The full scope of Robert's plan was breathtaking. He hadn't just protected me financially. He'd created consequences for every aspect of their betrayal. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. James's expression softened. He wanted to, but he was afraid you might try to stop him, or that you might accidentally reveal something to Marcus. He knew how much you loved your son, despite everything. I did love him, I whispered. I still do. Robert understood that. That's why he gave Marcus and Victoria multiple chances to change their behavior. Right up until the end, if they had shown any genuine care for you, he might have reconsidered. But they hadn't. They doubled down on their cruelty, convinced that Robert was too confused to stop them. Tomorrow's reading is at 10 a.m., James said. Are you ready for this? I looked at the evidence of my husband's love and protection spread across the desk. Robert had spent his final months not just fighting his illness, but fighting for my future. He'd outmaneuvered two people who thought they were smarter than him, and he'd done it all while letting them think he was helpless. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. I'm ready. As I left James Morrison's office, I realized that tomorrow would be more than just a will reading. It would be the moment when Marcus and Victoria discovered that they'd been playing a game they'd already lost against an opponent they'd never really understood. The conference room at Morrison & Associates felt like a courtroom. I sat in a leather chair across from Marcus and Victoria, my hands folded in my lap, trying to look like the helpless widow they expected me to be. James Morrison sat at the head of the polished table, Robert's will in a manila folder before him. Victoria had dressed for the occasion in a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She kept checking her phone, as if inheriting $53 million was just another appointment on her busy schedule. Marcus wore a dark suit I recognized. Robert had bought it for him last Christmas, back when we still believed he was a loving son. Thank you all for coming, James began formally. We're here for the reading of Robert Thornton's last will and testament, executed on February 15th of this year. Victoria looked up from her phone. February? That's only 6 weeks before he died. Was he mentally competent to make changes so close to the end? I watched James's face remain perfectly neutral. Mr. Thornton was thoroughly examined by 2 independent physicians before executing this will. Both certified his mental competency. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of changes are we talking about? All will be revealed in due course, James replied. The will specifically requests that it be read in its entirety before any questions are entertained. He opened the folder, and I noticed his hands were steady. Mine were trembling slightly, so I clasped them tighter in my lap. I, Robert Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Victoria smiled slightly. She thought she knew what was coming. First, to my beloved wife Helen Thornton, who has been my companion, my comfort, and my greatest joy for 43 years of marriage. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Even in a legal document, Robert's love came through. To Helen, I leave my personal effects, including all jewelry, photographs, and items of sentimental value. I also leave her the house at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, along with all furnishings and contents. Marcus nodded approvingly. That matched what they'd expected. The house and personal items for me, the money for them. Additionally, James continued, I leave to Helen the sum of $500,000 for her immediate needs and comfort. Victoria shifted in her seat. $500,000 was more than they'd anticipated for me, but it still left over $50 million for them. Now, to my son Marcus Thornton. Marcus straightened up, his expression already showing the smugness of anticipated wealth. To Marcus, I leave the sum of $1. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Marcus blinked rapidly, as if he'd misheard. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Victoria's voice was sharp. $1, James repeated clearly. There must be a mistake, Marcus said, his voice rising. Read it again. James continued without acknowledging the interruption. To Victoria Thornton, wife of my son, I leave the sum of $1. Victoria shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. Robert wasn't competent. No father leaves his son $1. This will is invalid. Please sit down, Mrs. Thornton, James said calmly. There's more. Victoria remained standing, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. Marcus looked like he might be sick. The remainder of my estate, James continued, including all bank accounts, investment portfolios, business interests, and real estate holdings not otherwise specified, totaling approximately $52.5 million, I leave entirely to my wife Helen Thornton. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic outside, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This is impossible, Victoria whispered. Furthermore, James read, I include the following explanation for these bequests. He looked up at Marcus and Victoria. This is a letter your father wrote specifically for this moment. Victoria sank back into her chair, her face pale. To my son, Marcus and his wife Victoria, for the past year, I have watched you systematically manipulate, deceive, and plan to betray the woman I love most in this world. I have documented your theft of nearly $500,000 from my accounts. I have recorded your discussions of having Helen declared mentally incompetent so you could control her finances. I have evidence of your credit card fraud and your elaborate plans to isolate her from friends and family. Marcus's hands were shaking now. He was sick. He was paranoid. This isn't— James held up a hand for silence and continued reading. You believed I was too confused by medication to understand what you were doing. You were wrong. Every cruel word about Helen, every plan to steal from this family, every moment you thought I was too weak to protect my wife, I was watching, listening, and documenting. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. You can't do this. We're family. We took care of him. You took care of yourselves, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. I heard the recordings, Victoria. I saw the bank statements. She whirled to face me, her eyes blazing. You don't understand. You're not capable of understanding. That money should go to people who can actually use it productively. The way Marcus used it productively when he stole it for his failed business ventures? I asked. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. That wasn't stealing. Dad knew I needed help with the company. Did he know you forged his signature on the transfer authorizations? James asked mildly. Because we have handwriting analysis that proves you did. This is a setup, Victoria said, her voice becoming shrill. Helen manipulated a sick old man into changing his will. She's the one who should be investigated. James opened another folder. Actually, Mrs. Thornton, let me share something else your father-in-law included in his will. He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. It showed Victoria and Marcus at a real estate office, clearly visible through the window, shaking hands with an agent. This was taken 3 weeks before your father-in-law's death, James said to Marcus. You were already shopping for investment properties with money you hadn't inherited yet. Victoria grabbed the photo. This proves nothing. It proves you were so confident of inheriting that you were already spending the money, James replied. The real estate agent is prepared to testify that you put down a deposit on a $2 million property, claiming you'd have full payment within the month. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. We were planning ahead. That's not illegal. No, but embezzlement is illegal. Credit card fraud is illegal. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse is illegal. James pulled out yet another document. Your father included specific instructions about what should happen if you contest this will or attempt to harass Helen in any way. What kind of instructions? Victoria asked, though her voice suggested she already feared the answer. All evidence of your criminal activities will be turned over to the district attorney's office. Sarah Chen, the private investigator your father hired, has already prepared criminal complaints against both of you. The color drained from Victoria's face. Sarah Chen? You met her, actually. She was the home health aide you thought Robert had hired for his final weeks. She recorded every conversation you had in that house. I remembered the quiet woman who'd helped with Robert's care. I'd liked her immediately, thought she was especially good at making Robert comfortable. Now I understood why. She wasn't just caring for him, she was helping him protect me. This is extortion, Marcus said weakly. No, James replied. This is justice. Your father has given you a choice. Accept your $1 inheritance quietly, never contact Helen again, and your criminal activities remain a private family matter. Or contest the will and face the full consequences of your actions in criminal court. Victoria was hyperventilating now. We have rights. We have legal rights. You forfeited your rights when you chose to steal and manipulate, I said, standing up. For the first time in weeks, I felt strong. Robert loved you, Marcus. Even at the end, he hoped you might change, but you didn't. Mom, please, Marcus said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy I remembered. We can work this out. Family shouldn't fight like this. You're right, I said. Family shouldn't steal from each other. Family shouldn't plan to have their mother declared incompetent. Family shouldn't celebrate their father's terminal diagnosis as a business opportunity. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You want to play this game? We'll contest everything. We'll tie this up in court for years. James reached for his phone. Should I call District Attorney Williams now, or would you prefer to make that call yourself when you're arrested? You're bluffing, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. James pressed a button on his phone. Sarah, could you bring in the evidence boxes? Mrs. Victoria Thornton would like to see what we'll be presenting to the DA. The door opened and a woman I recognized as Robert's health aide entered, wheeling a cart loaded with file boxes. Hello again, Mrs. Thornton, Sarah Chen said to me with a gentle smile. Your husband was very proud of you. He said you'd handle this with more grace than they deserved. Victoria stared at the boxes of evidence. Months of documented theft, manipulation, and conspiracy. The weight of it seemed to finally hit her. How long do we have to decide? Marcus asked quietly. The will reading is complete, James said. You have 24 hours to inform me of your decision. Accept the terms quietly, or face criminal prosecution. Victoria grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This isn't over, she said. But her threat sounded hollow. Marcus lingered for a moment, looking at me with something that might have been regret. Mom, You made your choice, I said. You made it months ago. He nodded slowly and followed Victoria out of the conference room. As the door closed behind them, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. James and Sarah were organizing papers, but I just sat there, trying to process what had just happened. Mrs. Thornton? James's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I looked up at him, this young lawyer who had helped my husband orchestrate the most complex act of love I'd ever witnessed. I think, I said slowly, I'm better than all right. For the first time in months, I think I'm free. As I walked out of that conference room, I realized that Robert had given me more than just financial security. He'd given me proof that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for. Tomorrow, I would start the first day of the rest of my life, and for the first time in years, that life belonged entirely to me. 22 hours after the will reading, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But something in me needed to hear what he had to say. Mom? His voice was different, smaller, defeated. Can we talk? Victoria and we'd like to come over. To my house? I asked. After everything they'd done, they wanted to return to the scene of their attempted crime. Please, We need to discuss the situation. I looked around the living room where just days ago Victoria had called me too old to manage money. The same room where Marcus had produced papers to strip me of everything Robert and I had built together. 1 hour, I said. And Marcus, don't bring papers for me to sign. When they arrived, the change in their demeanor was startling. Victoria's designer confidence had evaporated. She looked older somehow, her makeup unable to hide the stress lines around her eyes. Marcus couldn't meet my gaze as they settled uncomfortably on the couch where they'd once sat so smugly. "We've been thinking about what the lawyer said," Victoria began, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "About the criminal charges. And?" I sat across from them, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. Marcus finally looked up. "How long did Dad know? About about what we were planning? Long enough to protect me from you." I kept my voice steady, though seeing my son's defeat stirred complicated emotions. "He hired investigators, Marcus. He recorded your conversations. He knew about the stolen money, the forged signatures, the plans to have me committed." Victoria flinched. "We never actually tried to have you committed. Only because Robert died before you could complete your plan." I pulled out copies of the emails James had given me. "But you had already contacted Dr. Hartwell. You had already researched facilities. You had already decided my fate." "That was just contingency planning," Marcus said weakly. "Contingency planning?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You planned to steal my inheritance, isolate me from friends, and lock me away in a nursing home. What part of that sounds like love to you?" Silence filled the room. Victoria stared at her hands while Marcus struggled with words that wouldn't come. "Your father left you each $1, I continued, "but he also left you a choice. Accept it and walk away or face criminal prosecution for everything you've done." "The theft charges?" Victoria said quietly. "How serious are they?" "Serious enough that you could both face prison time." I had no sympathy left for her fears. "Marcus embezzled nearly $500,000. You committed credit card fraud. Together you conspired to commit elder abuse against a terminally ill man." Marcus buried his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to go this far." "When did you mean for it to stop?" I asked. "When I was locked away and you had spent all of Robert's money? When I died alone in some facility while you lived in luxury?" "We would have visited," Victoria said, then seemed to realize how pathetic that sounded. "Like you visited after your father's funeral?" I stood up and walked to the window, needing distance from their presence. "You celebrated his death, Victoria. I heard the recording. You toasted with champagne while I was grieving." "We were relieved," she admitted. "He'd been sick for so long." "He'd been sick for 3 months. You were relieved because you thought you could finally get rid of me." The weight of their betrayal settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. These were the people I'd loved, trusted, welcomed into my family, and they had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. "What do you want from us?" Marcus asked finally. I turned back to face them. "I want you to leave my house and never contact me again." "That's it?" Victoria looked surprised. "You're not going to press charges? That depends entirely on you." I sat back down, but kept my distance. "Your father gave you a way out. Take your dollar inheritance, walk away quietly, and we never have to see each other again." "What about the business?" Marcus asked. "Dad's construction company. I've been running it for 5 years. You've been running it into the ground for 5 years." I had done my homework since the will reading. "The company Robert built is now worth exactly what you're inheriting from his estate. $1. Marcus's face crumpled. "I tried to make it work. The economy, the competition. You tried to use it as your personal piggy bank. Every time the company made money, you transferred it to your personal accounts for business expenses that were actually vacations and luxury purchases." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. She'd been the beneficiary of many of those business expenses. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You'll sign over any remaining business assets to settle the company's debts. You'll return the credit cards you've been using fraudulently, and you'll disappear from my life." "What about our house?" Victoria asked. "The mortgage depends on Marcus's job with the company." "You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from his dying father." I felt no sympathy for their financial problems. "You're both young enough to start over, get jobs, build something honest for once." Marcus looked around the living room, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the comfortable furniture Robert and I had chosen together, the life he'd tried to steal from me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice sounded genuine. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." "For which part?" I asked. "For stealing from your father? For planning to have me committed? For celebrating his death? Or just for getting caught?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Victoria stood up abruptly. "We need to discuss this privately. This is a big decision." "No," I said firmly. "There's nothing to discuss. You have until tomorrow morning to inform James Morrison of your decision, accept the inheritance terms, or face criminal charges." "You're really going to destroy your own son?" Victoria's mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "What would Robert think about you sending Marcus to prison? Robert is the one who gathered the evidence against him." I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. "He's the one who set up the criminal complaints. Even dying, your husband was a better father than either of you deserved." "He wasn't my husband," Victoria snapped. "He was my father-in-law, and he was a controlling old man who couldn't stand the thought of anyone else having influence over his precious son." The venom in her voice revealed what I'd suspected all along. Victoria had hated Robert, had resented his place in Marcus's life, and had seen his death as liberation rather than loss. "Get out," I said quietly. "Helen," Marcus started, "get out of my house. You have your choice to make. Make it somewhere else." They left without another word, Victoria's heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor, Marcus following behind her like a defeated shadow. After they were gone, I sat in Robert's favorite chair and pulled out the final letter he'd left for me, the one James had given me privately after the will reading. "My dearest Helen," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've faced them down and sent them away. I'm proud of you, even though I'm not there to tell you so." The letter went on to explain more of his reasoning, his pain at discovering Marcus's true nature, his determination to protect me from their cruelty. "I know you're wondering if we should have tried harder to reach him, to fix whatever went wrong in raising him. But some people choose their path, Helen. Marcus chose greed over love, manipulation over honesty. That wasn't our failure. It was his." Robert had included instructions for my new life, bank account information, contact details for financial advisors he trusted, suggestions for how to use the wealth in ways that would bring me joy rather than stress. "Don't let their betrayal make you bitter," the letter continued. "You have decades ahead of you, and you deserve to spend them with people who value your kindness, your intelligence, your beautiful heart. I'm sorry I can't be there to share those years with you, but I'll rest easier knowing you're free to find happiness on your own terms." The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. "You were never too old to deserve love, respect, and security. Don't let anyone, not even our son, convince you otherwise. You are worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth fighting for. I hope my final act as your husband proved that to you." As I folded the letter carefully, I realized that Robert had given me more than financial independence. He'd given me validation, proof that I was worth the elaborate plan he'd constructed to protect me. After months of being told I was too old, too confused, too dependent, I finally had evidence that I was valuable enough for someone to fight for. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time, it was James Morrison. "Mrs. Thornton, I wanted to let you know that Marcus and Victoria just called. They've accepted the terms of the will. No contest, no further contact with you, and they'll return all property that rightfully belongs to the estate." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "There's one more thing," James continued. "Sarah Chen asked me to give you a message from your husband. He wanted you to know that he'd hidden something special for you to find when you were ready for it. Check behind the loose floorboard in his study, under the Persian rug." After hanging up, I went to Robert's study and moved the heavy rug he'd loved so much. Sure enough, one of the floorboards was slightly raised. Underneath, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me in Robert's handwriting, all dated during his illness. Love letters he'd written when he thought I wasn't watching, when he was supposed to be napping or resting. The first one was dated just a week after his diagnosis. "My darling Helen, I'm not afraid of dying. but I'm terrified of leaving you vulnerable to people who would hurt you. I promise I'll find a way to protect you, even after I'm gone." Each letter chronicled his growing awareness of Marcus and Victoria's betrayal, his pain at discovering their true nature, and his determination to shield me from their cruelty. But more than that, they were filled with memories of our life together, expressions of love and gratitude for the 43 years we'd shared. The last letter was written just days before he died. "Helen, my time is almost up, but my love for you will outlast everything Marcus and Victoria try to do to us. You gave me the best years of my life. Now let me give you the freedom to enjoy whatever years you have left." Sitting surrounded by Robert's final love letters, I understood that tomorrow wouldn't just be the first day of my new financial independence. It would be the first day of the rest of my life, a life where I would never again have to question my worth or accept anyone's cruelty. Robert had made sure of that. 6 months after the will reading, I stood in the garden of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The house was smaller than the mansion Robert and I had shared, but it was mine in a way that felt completely different. Every choice, from the pale yellow kitchen walls to the reading nook by the largest window, reflected my own preferences rather than what someone else expected of me. The move had been liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Leaving behind the house where Marcus and Victoria had plotted against me felt like shedding an old skin. Here, in this cozy craftsman cottage on 3 acres outside the city, I could finally breathe. My morning routine had changed too. Instead of waking up to anxiety about what fresh manipulation awaited me, I woke up excited about the day ahead. Today, like every Tuesday for the past 3 months, I was volunteering at the senior center downtown, teaching watercolor classes to people who, like me, had discovered that being 64 meant you were just getting started. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria had insisted I was too old to manage my own affairs, yet here I was, managing not just my substantial inheritance, but using it to enrich other people's lives. The scholarship fund I'd established for senior citizens returning to college had already helped 12 people pursue dreams they'd thought were beyond their reach. As I sipped my coffee and reviewed my plans for the day, the phone rang. For a split second, old fears surfaced. Would it be Marcus or Victoria, trying once more to worm their way back into my life? But caller ID showed it was Dorothy, my oldest friend, calling with her usual morning check-in. "How's the free woman today?" Dorothy asked, her voice warm with affection. She'd been one of the few people who'd seen through Victoria's manipulations from the beginning, though I'd been too blind to listen to her warnings at the time. "Free and getting freer every day," I replied, settling into the window seat where I could watch the birds at my new feeders. "I'm heading to the gallery this afternoon to look at spaces for the art show." The art show had been Dorothy's idea. "You've been painting again," she'd said last month, looking at the canvases that had been accumulating in my spare bedroom. "These are beautiful, Helen. People should see them." I'd been hesitant at first. Displaying my art felt vulnerable, exposed. But then I realized that vulnerability was just another form of freedom, the freedom to share parts of myself I'd kept hidden for years. "Any word from you-know-who?" Dorothy asked carefully. She never used Marcus's name anymore, referring to him only as you-know-who, with the same tone she might use for an unpleasant disease. "Nothing. James says they've relocated to Phoenix. Fresh start, apparently." I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus had taken a job with a construction company there, starting over at the bottom. Victoria was working as a sales associate at a department store. The humbling they'd brought on themselves was complete. "Good riddance," Dorothy said firmly. "You deserve peace." After we hung up, I finished my breakfast and prepared for my volunteer shift. The senior center had become more than just a place to donate my time. It had become a community of people who understood that life didn't end at retirement, that there were still adventures to be had, relationships to build, dreams to pursue. At the center, I was setting up supplies for the watercolor class when Margaret Stillwell approached me. Margaret was 78, had been widowed for 5 years, and had signed up for art classes because her daughter insisted she needed age-appropriate activities. "Helen," Margaret said, her voice excited, "I have news. I showed my paintings to my granddaughter, and she wants to feature them in her coffee shop. She says people would pay money for them." I smiled at Margaret's enthusiasm. 6 months ago, she'd been convinced her creative days were behind her. Now she was planning her first art sale. That's wonderful, Margaret. You've found your voice. My voice, she repeated thoughtfully. I like that. For so many years, I let other people tell me what I should want, what I should do. My husband, my children, even my doctor. But these paintings, they're mine. As the class progressed, I watched 12 seniors discover joy in mixing colors, in creating something beautiful with their own hands. Many of them were like Margaret, people who'd been told by family members that they were too old for new pursuits, too set in their ways to change. Helen called out Frank Morrison, a retired engineer whose family had tried to convince him to move to assisted living after his wife died. This purple doesn't look right. What am I doing wrong? I walked over to examine his work, a landscape of the park where he and his late wife used to walk. You're not doing anything wrong, Frank. You're just learning what colors speak to you. Try adding a touch of blue. Frank had become one of my favorite success stories. 6 months ago, his adult children had been pressuring him to sell his house and move into a facility because they worried about him living alone. Now, he was taking art classes, had joined a hiking group, and was dating a lovely woman named Ruth from the book club. My kids don't understand why I won't move to Sunny Meadows, he'd confided to me last week. They keep saying it would be easier for everyone, but easier for who? Not for me. I'd encouraged Frank to stand firm, the same way Robert had encouraged me to stand firm against people who wanted to control my choices. After the art class, I drove to the gallery district downtown to meet with Maria Santos, the owner of Sunrise Gallery. Maria was a dynamic woman in her 50s who specialized in showcasing work by artists over 60. Society has this strange notion that creativity peaks in youth, Maria had told me when we first met. But in my experience, some of the most powerful art comes from people who've lived long enough to understand what really matters. Today, we were finalizing plans for my first solo show. The theme was Second Chances, paintings I'd created since Robert's death, each one representing some aspect of my journey from victim to survivor to someone who was genuinely thriving. This one, Maria said, stopping in front of a canvas I'd painted last month. It showed a bird breaking free from a gilded cage, its wings spread wide against a sky full of possibilities. This will be your centerpiece. There's so much emotion in it. I studied the painting, remembering the day I'd created it. I'd been thinking about Robert's love letters, about how he'd fought to give me wings even as he was dying. The bird in the painting wasn't just escaping, it was celebrating its freedom. I want to donate 20% of any sales to the senior center, I told Maria, for their arts program. That's generous, Maria smiled, but not surprising. I've heard about your scholarship fund. Word had gotten around about my various charitable endeavors. It felt strange to be known for giving rather than taking, for building rather than destroying. Victoria had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps the most wrong she'd been was her belief that older people couldn't make a meaningful impact. As I drove home that afternoon, I took a detour past the house Robert and I had shared. New owners had moved in, a young family with small children. I could see toys scattered in the yard, bicycles on the front porch. The house looked happy again, alive in a way it hadn't been during those final months when it was filled with Marcus and Victoria's toxic energy. I felt no sadness looking at it now, only gratitude. That house had sheltered my marriage, raised my son, and ultimately revealed the truth about the people in my life. Now it was serving a new family, just as I was serving a new purpose in my own life. Back home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The silence was complete. No manipulative phone calls, no guilt trips, no one questioning my decisions or my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, the investigator who'd helped Robert protect me. She checked in occasionally, partly professional courtesy and partly genuine friendship. Saw the announcement about your art show in the paper. Robert would be so proud. I typed back, he gave me the freedom to discover who I really am. You always were this person, came her reply. You just needed someone to clear away the obstacles so you could shine. As darkness settled over the mountains, I pulled out one of Robert's letters, not to grieve, but to remember. His words had become a source of strength rather than sorrow, reminding me that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into something that continues to protect and guide. You are worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth fighting for. I read aloud to the evening air. I hope my final act as your husband proved that to you. It had proven it beyond any doubt, but more than that, Robert's plan had proven it to me. After 64 years of being told by various people that I was too young, too old, too naive, too dependent, I finally knew my own worth. The art show was scheduled for next month. My paintings would hang in a real gallery, with my name on a placard, with people paying money to take them home. At 64, I was having my first solo exhibition. Margaret had been right about finding your voice. For too many years, I'd let other people speak for me. My parents when I was young, Robert when I was married, and finally Marcus and Victoria when I was grieving. But Robert's final gift hadn't just been money or security. It had been the space to discover that I had a voice of my own, and that voice had something valuable to say. Tomorrow, I would teach another watercolor class, continue planning the art show, and maybe start the novel I'd been thinking about writing. There would be lunch with Dorothy, a yoga class at the community center, and dinner with Frank and Ruth and some of the other friends I'd made since claiming my independence. At 64, I was just getting started. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. In the distance, I could see lights beginning to twinkle in houses where other people were settling in for the evening. Other people who might be facing their own struggles with family members who underestimated them. Other people who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose freedom over security, authenticity over approval. I smiled, thinking about the title I'd chosen for my art show. Late Bloomer, a celebration of second chances. Victoria had been wrong about almost everything, but she'd been especially wrong about one thing. I wasn't too old to start over. I was exactly the right age to begin. As I locked up my cottage and prepared for bed, I realized that this wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter in my life. It was the beginning of the story I'd always been meant to write, one where the heroine discovers that the most beautiful gardens often bloom in unexpected seasons, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to plant new seeds, even when others insist the growing season is over. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.